Thank you, Frank. Our next speaker is John Guandolo. John is a very distinguished graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, not too far away from here, a United States Marine, served in Operation Desert Storm, Desert Shield and Desert Storm. In 1996, John left the Marine Corps, I guess sort of temporarily. You hung up your uniform someplace. Joined the FBI, and over the years, he rose up the ranks in the Counterterrorism Division, and ultimately, by 2006, had devised a teaching curriculum for FBI agents in the field on the Muslim Brotherhood, Islamic doctrine, and the global Islamic movement. So John is an authentic expert on how the Muslim Brotherhood has infiltrated and penetrated American society. And I think, John, you can talk to us about some of the various front organizations that the Muslim Brotherhood uses, some of them that appear quite innocuous. Gee, they only own mosques. I mean, what's wrong with that? You know, there's nothing wrong with that. But in fact, when you look into it, and this is what I hope John is going to tell us, when you look into the ownership of what they're doing and where the money comes from, you find out that a lot of the money comes from overseas. So, with no further ado, John Guandolo.
Good morning. Good morning. How are y'all doing? I'm glad Ken got it right. I am a Marine. As I like, no offense to my Army brethren out there, but I always tell them, you join the Army, you become a Marine, so. I want to say I grew up in Montgomery County, Maryland. Yes. That's, I think, the first time in my life I ever felt like people who understood what that means. That's right. You know, I had a friend of mine, well, actually I should say somebody I know, who has a very strong left-leaning bent, and trying to explain why we shouldn't be talking to our enemies the way we are. In other words, I'm not saying you never talk to them, but you go in knowledgeable that they're your enemy. And he said, well, you know, we need to talk to them and, you know, really figure them out. And, you know, if we treat them better, they'll treat us better, which is nonsense. But I said, you mean like détente? And he's like, yeah, like détente. I was like, well, that worked out pretty well with the Russians. But I always think of what Ronald Reagan said about détente. He said, détente is a relationship that a farmer has with a turkey right up until Thanksgiving. And I just think, you know, when we think about it, I want you to imagine September 9th, 2001. Do you think Mullah Omar and Ayman al-Zawahiri and Osama bin Laden were sitting around? Do you think they could have ever imagined that today, that Afghanistan and Iraq would be Islamic republics at the hand of the United States, who wrote those constitutions? That we'd be $15 trillion in debt? That we would be engaged in military actions around the world, and that in fact the Muslim Brotherhood would literally have control of the national security decision-making of the United States. Now, if that sounds a little over the top to you, let me just throw this out at you and we'll walk through it in a minute. If I can demonstrate here today that it's the Muslim Brotherhood exclusively advising the President and the Secretary of State, FBI, CIA, DOD, and are in the Pentagon, then it might start to cross your mind that that may be why we're witnessing the complete Muslim Brotherhood revolution in the Middle East and Africa. And our leadership calls it a freedom movement led by students who organized on Twitter. Now that is catastrophic national security failure. And that's true. And as these gentlemen can attest, we've started to make headway within the system, especially on Capitol Hill at senior levels. But we're almost into 2012. And if you ask somebody from the FBI and leadership, CIA, DOD, State Department, to just on a 3x5 card write down who the enemy is and what their objective is, they can't do it. And what I would encourage you to at least be open to is that if we can't put our finger on the enemy and identify him, you can't go after him and you can't defeat him. It seems to me we're not talking about victory anymore. We're talking about getting out. I think it's appalling because we have men and women who've given their lives, and we've given a lot here at home too. So my purpose in the next, I guess, 10 to plus minutes until Ken gives me the hook sign, is to introduce you to the organization, the international organization, which is the vanguard for the Islamic movement. And that is the Muslim Brotherhood. Now there are other groups, like some of you may have heard of Hizb ut-Tahrir, Tablighi Jamaat, Jamaat-e-Islami. There are others, but this is the lead organization. And they're the ones driving the movement. And so as I go into talking about the Brotherhood, I want you to understand that there is a complete unity in the movement. The detractors will tell you, it's all these kinds of things going on, and there's no real, the Islamic world doesn't have a pope. So there is no real defining, driving. That's a lie. What drives them and what drives everybody who's fighting us is Shariah. 100% of the enemy we face say we fight in furtherance of the imposition of Shariah. Al-Qaeda says it. The Muslim Brotherhood says it. I'll show you that here in a minute. And every Muslim leader in the world under the OIC, the Organization of the Islamic Conference, has formally served documents to the United Nations saying we seek to impose Islamic law in the world. So, when someone tells you, well, but there's no unity to this, yes, there is. And when we can demonstrate that Hezbollah and Hamas, Shia and Sunni, are working together officially, and here in the U.S., the Muslim Brotherhood groups are working with which is Sunni, are working with the Shia, and they've actually signed documents to agree to do it and to put aside their own differences until the goal is reached, then I would say there's a pretty clear objective and a pretty clear unity, and it's Sharia. So let me dive right in here, because I guess the first question we have to ask is, do we have a problem? And so I'm going to give you this in 60 seconds or less. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of Abdurrahman al-Amudi. Okay, besides the panel. Okay, actually that's pretty good out there. So we got maybe over a dozen people out there, that's good. Well, let me give you his bio in 15 seconds or less. He was the Islamic advisor to President Clinton. He was the leader and founder of almost 24 of the largest Islamic organizations in North America. He was a goodwill ambassador for the State Department, participated in the Middle East peace process on behalf of the U.S. government. He founded the Muslim chaplain program for the Department of Defense. And in 2003, he was arrested at Heathrow Airport in London with $340,000 cash that he got from Muammar Gaddafi for the global jihad. He was implicated in a plot to kill Saudi Crown Prince, who became King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia. He's a Muslim brother, a Hamas operative, and a financier for Al-Qaeda. He was extradited, pled guilty in Alexandria, Virginia, and is now serving 23 years in Supermax. However, that was recently reduced by the Attorney General. By the Justice Department, to be fair. Okay, why is this important? Let me review for those of you who just missed this. The advisor to the President of the United States was Al-Qaeda. The guy who created the Muslim chaplain program for the Department of Defense was Al-Qaeda. And as I'll show you in a few minutes, now the Bureau of Prisons and DoD Muslim chaplains are certified by a Hamas front. So it might indicate we have a little problem. Does everybody agree we have a problem? Now, I know I'm among conservatives, so when I show this people start making, well, be careful. Because this enemy doesn't care whether you're liberal or conservative, Republican or Democrat. Muslim Brothers have been in the White House, in this administration, and in the previous administration and the Clinton administration. Senior White House people, Muslims were Muslim.